Hello, and welcome to this week's Pi Chat Live, the evolving model of public-private international student recruitment partnerships in North America. Models of international student recruitment partnerships between universities and private organizations are very well established in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. However, attempts to operate similar partnerships in Canada and the US have met with, well, mixed results. In this Pi Chat Live, we will talk to new entrants to this space, Oxford International Education Group, OIEG, who recently announced pathway partnerships with San Francisco State University and Mercy University in New York. We will discuss their approach to North America, what makes OIEG different, and why they expect to succeed. I am Nick Golding of the Pi, and I'm joined by Sanam Raza, Senior Vice President of OIEG USA, and Lucy Howe, VP for OIEG Higher Education Canada. You will have noticed that we have changed the platform for this Pi Chat Live to Zoom because of a technical issue with our previous provider. The format remains the same, however, 30-minute chat, and I'll be asking a number of questions of Sanam and Lucy, but we'd also like you to answer your questions. Ask your questions, I'm so sorry. Alternatively, join the chat and a recording will be available as usual, just as soon as we go off air. And now I'm going to go straight to our theme. And Sanam, can I put this to you, please, first? OIEG has recently formed two partnerships, as I mentioned a moment ago, in the US, and you already have a number of schools and colleges in Canada. Can you explain OIEG's North American footprint for us?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Nick, for having me on Pi Live Chat today. I'm very happy to be here. OIEG is the connecting bridge between international students and their ambitions to study in Anglophone countries. So let's talk about North America. I'll speak specifically about the US. So not sure if you know this, but OIEG has been in the US for the last 9 years. And true to our roots, we've been in English language teaching and learning for the past 9 years. We have language proficiency test centers, and we do summer programs, immersion language programs for juniors. As you mentioned, in the last 18 months, we've launched 2 new university partnerships in the United States, San Francisco State University and Mercy University in New York City. In addition to that, that's our physical footprint. But in addition to that, we're promoting our digital footprint in the United States as well. And we have universities that are partnering with us for the Oxford ELLT, which is our language level test, as well as the English for academic purposes online kind of pathway into universities as well. So really a multifaceted footprint, nested in our core capabilities around language learning and teaching, and now more so recently in the United States, university pathways. But we have, been in university partnerships and those types of relationships in the UK for many years. And I'll pass it over to Lucy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanam and Nick. And just to mirror what Sanam said, thank you so much for having us here today. And I think this is a great lead up to the Pi Live event in Boston next week, which we will be attending. So I think this is a perfect timing for this kind of discussion. So Canada, that wonderful country north of the US, we are long established in the ESL market. Language schools in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Toronto, and Vancouver. Included in our portfolio, we have our post-secondary pathway programs, both in person and now online via our digital institute. Very successful junior summer programs. And in Canada, we have those on the campus of UBC and Toronto Metropolitan, plus year-round groups that we have in our 3 locations as well. And then, very excitingly, in the last couple of years, we have expanded into establishing vocational career colleges in Canada in the same locations as our language schools. In Halifax, we have our continuing care assistant certificate program, which is also linked to an immigration stream, Nova Scotia's international graduates in demand stream. And in Vancouver, we have hospitality management and soon our first cohort in business management. Plus, of course, in the US, as in Canada, we have our IELTS testing centers and venues, which is much in demand. So that's us in a nutshell for US and Canada.
So actually, when I introduced you earlier as entrance to the space, that was really quite misleading. That may be true of the US, but less so in Canada. Is that a fair comment? You've been established in Canada for quite a while.
Yes. Well, yes, 1990, our first language school opened. So older than me, but yes, a long time.
And Sanam, if I can come back to you, clearly you've got ambitions for North America. Your own appointment is indicative of that, let alone the recent news of new partnerships. What can you tell us about your plans?
So we will be looking to expand our higher education institution partnerships, whether it's recruiting for universities and colleges in the United States, and as well as our digital footprint, as we talked about earlier as well. But our plans in the US are very much focused around the higher education institutions in the US. We will continue to focus on bringing international students to the United States. We're looking for universities that are a good fit for our partnership. We have a set of comprehensive capabilities, but there's a lot that we're learning as we're talking to prospective university partners. And one of the things that we're going to be focusing on is how do we create bundles of packages in terms of services and capabilities that we support universities with. So really the approach is to meet institutions where they are in their internationalization strategy and support their needs as well as match to the needs of international students. That's the approach that we're taking, but certainly focused around higher education.
I'm going to come back to that, if I may, in a moment, because I want to get to the question of do embedded pathways work in the US, but we'll come to that. So Lucy, does OIEG separately or in an integrated way have plans for Canada alongside its US plans?
That's an excellent question. And I have to say it's both separate and integrated, because we have to take advantage of what we can do, what we are able to offer, what we're able to provide in both countries. So as Sanam said, we are in Canada, we are experiencing and anticipating growth. And if I may, I wanted to just give a few keywords that are sort of very much linked to our strategy. And I'm going to speak for Sanam as well. I think this comes into play in the US as well. So quality education, employability, differentiation, collaboration, flexibility, and scalability. I think that's sort of our go-to words. We are definitely expanding in the career college market in Canada, vocational education. We've been working on that for a long time. And I think the importance of employability for international students is key. And especially in Canada, when employability can lead to immigration routes post-graduation. And in Canada, there's a huge skills gap. There's a labor shortage, and the career college education with co-op, it not only not only directly affects positive student outcomes and employability, but goes hand in hand with these labor shortages, which is trades, IT, healthcare, hospitality, you name it. So that's one area where vocational education is a huge area of growth for us and very exciting in Canada.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Now, I'm just going to pause us for a moment to check that our audience are actually engaging with us, because there's very little on the chat. So I want to remind them that if they want to ask you their own questions, please, audience, pop those into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And we'd love you to engage with us in the chat. Tell us where you're tuning in from, or play this new quiz of mine. In putting together this webinar, I discovered something yesterday that I really didn't know before. So we've come just after the clocks have changed, have moved back. So that happened in the UK at the last weekend of October. It happened in most of the US and Canada last weekend. So you can imagine the challenge we had putting this all together, except that one of our panelists lives in one of the 2 states in the US where the clocks never change. They never go forward and they never go back. So audience, I'm asking you to pop into the chat your answers to which 2 US states never change times. Right, back to our question. There is life. Fantastic. Oh, that's just too quick, Becca. You're just too quick off the mark. And I forgot to say no Googling. But
don't listen to Tonya. She works for us. She has an inside info.
Great. So, Sanam, coming back to you. As you know, I have a background in pathways, and it seems to me that the embedded pathways model works very successfully in the UK and Australia and New Zealand, but is met with mixed results in the US. Is that because the embedded partnership model is unsuitable for the US? Does it just not work there?
That is a very good question. I'm gonna start with, I want to say it depends, and here's why I say that. So in the United States, there are a few different models that support all of the critical elements that an embedded pathway would support in the UK and Australia. Like the primary elements are, academic readiness and support, language readiness and support, cultural sort of assimilation and familiarity, and, giving students the sort of a smooth landing. That type of a, support mechanism is offered through embedded pathways, indeed, in the United States. But there's also other ways that that's built into the US higher education system. So, for example, community colleges are an example of a built-in learning pathway into the US higher education system. In the US, the various IEP programs kind of cover this to some extent. There's certificate programs and other type of programming being offered through schools of continuing education or extension schools. So it's not a singular model, where it may be a more of a singular model in, the UK or Australia. I think the other thing to kind of keep in mind is it also depends on the university's strengths and where they are in terms of maturity of their internationalization strategy, really overall. At that point, does a model that has sort of, autonomous governance and its own sort of set of financial financial KPIs, does that make sense versus a more integrated model right into the university or the higher education system? So I think it really depends. And for any model to be durable, both in terms of providing success to students and supporting the institution and meeting their goals, we really have to look at where's the university at, what is going to work. And some of the things that we actually talk to our partners and our prospective partners about is really having a set of programs that supports different kinds of needs of international students coming into the university rather than a singular approach. So, I mean, that's the long answer to a long question.
Does that, but before I come on to you, Lucy, is that to imply that the UK and other pathway providers, because they're not all from the UK, have, in your opinion, adopted a one-size-fits-all approach to the US in the past?
Not going to say that, right? I mean, when every new market, there's a process of iteration, and market dynamics sort of sort things out for themselves. And I think we've sort of seen that in the United States. There's been a decline in these embedded pathway partnerships over the years, which I think we've all come across. We've all seen a rise in the direct recruiting or strategic enrollment type of partnerships. So I think that the market is sending us a signal. The higher education institutions are sending us a signal, and the international student community is sending us a signal. So it may make sense for all of us to pay attention to these signals and prepare for the evolution of these models. I mean, you always need a place to start. Models that have worked really well in the UK or Australia perhaps was a place to start. And in certain cases, they're working quite well. There's several examples of very successful models in the United States, but in a higher education sector within the US where different approaches work for different institutions at different stages, I think one has to be mindful of that.
Thanks, Sanam. Amy McGowan, who's obviously in the audience and who you will be very familiar with, has just admired your diplomacy with great answer. Lucy, the pathway partnerships model that works in Canada, is it embedded pathways or is it also more nuanced?
I think you just answered my question, Nick, or your own question. It's embedded. How do I put this? I don't think it's that the embedded pathway model doesn't work in Canada or hasn't been successful. In fact, there's several very well established and successful embedded pathway collaborations in Canada. And I would say, and I'm maybe going out on a limb here, that I think it's perhaps more that there's a general wariness of private or commercial third-party partnerships in Canada. And for those real Canadians on this call, I do have a Canadian passport, so forgive me for my funny accent, but I have been here a long time. But I actually think that public funding and government funding is very deeply ingrained across Canadian higher ed. And most of our large post-secondary institutions are in fact public. Public universities, colleges are well funded. They cover pretty much the entire spectrum of studies. And they also, in a lot of cases, have many years of established international recruitment under their belts. So perhaps, face value, inbound recruitment is not an issue for them. That doesn't mean to say that support is not needed or required as we move forward. As Sanam mentioned, there are different pathway models. The embedded pathway model is particularly well suited for whether that's US or Canada, for those students that require additional language support. Perhaps have the academic requirements, also have the funds to pay for such an offering. And just if I may, there's been some recent media attention, an article in a Vancouver press about one particular embedded pathway program that's been very successful, but has seen declining numbers because of reliance on certain countries, and in this case, China. So I think that would lead to the nuance part, is that we have to be very aware of geopolitical trends. China, India, in the case of Canada recently, although hopefully that has improved slightly. But if you look at, for example, 2017, I believe, when the political tensions with Saudi reached, its all-time worst scenario, and I think Canada lost 8,000 students because of a political situation. So I think we have to be very aware of, or institutions and ourselves have to be very aware of market trends, and therefore accordingly, look at what institutions need and what kind of pathway model that is, because there's also public-private partnerships in the sense of a public college, private partner, private college. There are other types of partnerships, as Sanam referenced as well. It doesn't have to be embedded.
And I want to actually come right on to that and the brass tacks of that, because I know what an embedded pathway partnership looks like. The provider has the responsibility to go and market and sell the courses, deliver them, and ensure that the curriculum meets the standards of the receiving institution, and they have oversight over that. I think we all understand that model. If I am an American university, an international department, what else can you offer me apart from this that supports my international recruitment aspirations, Sana?
Yeah. So to your point, I mean, the embedded pathway model is very well defined. Everybody understands what it is. But there are students who don't need that type of language or academic support, or maybe need some language, some academic support. So we take an approach that really sort of addresses these needs. We offer, of course, we have pathways in our Mercer University and San Francisco State University partnerships. We'll also do direct recruitment, but in those instances, we're giving support to students when they need it, and primarily that's pre-arrival. It's one of the themes that has come across to us from several prospects that we're talking to is, I think pretty much everybody's reporting applications and admission volume move up, but not necessarily all of that sort of translates into enrollments. And those are some of the things that we support in terms of services, and really supporting the entire student journey and ensuring that they actually are making a decision that they're well informed with, and they land at the university, and they enroll and are successful. So it's a strategy of services that will support the university's own sort of self-directed, self-funded efforts. The secondary part of that strategy is Oxford going out into the market, signing up new regions, expanding the university's brand and reach, both into the university, sort of directly matriculate into degree programs, as well as look at some of the pathways that the university may already be offering. That's something that we're open to, and we do evaluate that. But also look at services that students may need across that path in terms of their decision and getting into the university. So there's different ways that we approach that, and we sort of design the set of services, and we design that strategy with our university partners.
Thank you, Sanam. And Lucy, would you have anything to add to that? Particularly is there anything different about how OIEG provides support for its partners in Canada?
No, I think Sanam covered it perfectly. What we are doing, and I think this is key to our success and institution success or our partners, is that we have to be flexible. We have to have the ability to pivot. We need to be in touch with the markets. Both institutions need to be, and we are too. And in the case of Oxford, we have a very large global recruitment team. And as Sam said, opening up new markets, looking at where emerging markets may come from. Just in the case of Canada, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, we're always on the pulse of what is happening. I think that's key, especially as I mentioned earlier, with all the uncertainty around the world right now. We listen. I think we're very good at listening, both Sanam and I, and the teams across North America. Listen to what the institution needs. We're not trying to give our package or our portfolio to them and this is what it must be. We can only be successful if we listen, and to be flexible. And I think diversity is key as well. It's something that we're able to bring, because all campuses, there's no denying, everybody wants diversity, and you can't be too reliant on certain countries. So I think, if we want to come away, if the audience here today, we want them to come away with the fact that we listen, we not want to listen, we do listen, and we want to offer our services that it's going to be beneficial for both parties, all parties.
Thanks, Lucy. Sanam, one question I have, particularly about the US, is this: that, and I'm genuinely ignorant of the answer here, but US institutions have been notoriously wary, for example, in adopting agents to recruit on their behalf. And it's very clear that the public-private partnership model, or certainly the Pathways model, has been far less popular in the US, which suggests a wariness of commercial organizations partnering with public institutions. Do you have prejudice to overcome in that respect? Is it harder work in the US than it is for pathway providers in other countries?
Yeah, so I think there's other barriers to overcome versus an aversion from public and private partnerships. I do think US universities are actually open to commercial partnerships. Domestically, they've seen the value of that. And it's, so it's reasonably mainstream. But certainly when it comes to internationalization strategies, that's where these partnerships are, not as mainstream, which is an interesting, mindset. I wouldn't say that institutions are wary of agents, but there's a huge focus around how do we retain quality? How do we retain, student expectations that are well set and are realistic, and student intentions are clear, and we're not dealing with a student who has a misalignment of what the institution is and what the institution has to offer, with a focus on student success and progression, right? I mean, that's a pretty critical metric of success in the United States, as I'm sure, retention is key. So I don't think there's a wariness of commercial partnerships. There is absolutely concerns around, quality. Institutions have seen that over-reliance on one region, one source country has certainly burnt them, and we've seen that across the pandemic in the past few years. So it's how do we scale, how do we get diversity while maintaining quality with trusted sources? That, I think, is a barrier to overcome. From a higher education institution mindset perspective. And then why can't we just do it ourselves? That's the other barrier to overcome. So what's the difference between working with a commercial partner and, and taking the DIY approach, as we call it in the United States here? So I don't think there's an aversion for commercial partnerships. I'm going to say that again. But certainly the mindset may be different, right? There's just it's more of an evaluating all the various options and, how do we retain quality and trusted and have a trusted partner.
Great, thank you very much indeed. I see we have an audience question from Alan Priest, which of course is going to be always will be slightly provocative, but I suspect you may not actually have data on this because of the recency of your partnerships. But he says, I see that Into University Partnerships, as we all know, just released both application and enrollment growth data for its US partners this year. Do you have any comparable numbers to share?
Yeah, I think you're right, Nick. So, Alan, our partnerships are fairly recent. We launched San Francisco State University. Our first cohort was fall of 2022, and Mercer University this past fall was our first cohort. So there's not a, the N is fairly small, so to speak. But however, we are very encouraged by the sort of, cohort over cohort success we've seen at San Francisco State University, as well as the fall on fall increase that we've seen at San Francisco State. It's very comparable to what one would expect when a new pathway program is launched from year 1 to year 2. So certainly, I mean, there's pretty positive indications that our growth is trending, with market, but our data is very new and the N is much smaller than what Into and Shorelight would have to report in the United States. Now in the UK, of course, we've got more robust numbers and more of a longer sort of trajectory on data reporting.
Great, thanks very much indeed for that, Sanam. Now we've got a minute left actually, so I've got 2 further things that I want to ask you. Can you crisply answer, do you foresee further evolution in your partnership models in the US and Canada? Is this going to constantly develop?
Yes, because the international recruitment and international students' needs are very dynamic. Models will evolve to, best work for students and best work for institutions. We're already seeing that in the US. It's not a new phenomenon. But the crisp short answer is yes.
And Lucy?
Absolutely, yes. I think what it comes down to is diversity and watching the trends. And as I said before, listening to what partners need. So there can be, I believe there can be all manner of different public-private partnerships, whether that's within our career colleges, with online offerings through the Digital Institute, embedded, direct recruitment. It's going to keep evolving, and we will for sure keep up with that by offering our sort of scalable, flexible solutions in both countries.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. And now the hand grenade. Our man in the New York courtroom at the moment, quite seriously, are you factoring in to your plans the prospect of a second Trump presidency?
Well, Sanam is moving to Canada, so
well, I'm staying in the US. I'm staying in the United States. Yes, right. I think so. In the these 2024 being an election year, we're not sure where things will land. As a business, our best defense around any sort of political uncertainty, and I must sort of comment that even in the past sort of Trump presidency, US was still the country that had the largest number of international students coming in. Though the growth rates certainly have declined, we certainly have lost a bit of market share, but not significant and not notable. So, with that in mind, our best kind of defense against any sort of changes, whether it's in source countries or in destination countries, is really focusing in and investing on a sort of a diverse strategy of recruiting students from multiple regions in the world. And that's where we have our staff and our resources focused. At the same time, we're also focused on building out a digital strategy for universities to extend to students who may not be able to leave their source countries. So I think a multifaceted strategy that encompasses, diversity, as I think Lucy has mentioned a few times, that's a big focus for us. And accessibility is the best defense, and that's what we've been preparing for.
I'm going to echo Amy earlier. Great answer, Sanam. Lucy, very quickly, anything that you would add from the Canadian perspective on the possibility of a Trump administration?
I'm going to shamelessly just copy what Sanam just said and say that accessibility is the best defense. Because if we can access students wherever they may be, whether they're in our countries, whether they're at home in, because for some reason they can't leave the country, whether it's to do with Trump policies or political situations in Canada or so on, I'm going to end with accessibility is our best defense.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we must now wrap this up. Thank you both very much indeed. There you have it, our audience, from time zone quirks, the Trump administration, to the evolving model of private-public partnerships in North America. And fascinating, both of you, for sharing your insights. If you want to connect with either Lucy in Canada or Sanam in the US, I suggest you go to LinkedIn as your primary source there. In addition, they are attending the Pi Live North America next week in Boston for the 13th and 14th of November, and they will be there and on one of our panels indeed. So thank you all very much for attending and for listening to us tonight, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, everyone, and we'll see you hopefully in Boston.